today from New Mexico in my show, The Capital Show. John Eastman, he's a lawyer. He's a very well-known, distinguished lawyer. He's a senior fellow from Claremont Institute. You are most welcome. I know you were at the center of the debate over the U.S. presidential election in 2020. I have the pleasure to have you on my show, and I want to start from that event. What specific role did you do and did you play in the certification process of the election results?
So President Trump called on me in end of November to try and help design a strategy that would get the Supreme Court to actually hear the evidence of illegality that was overwhelming. My first step was to intervene in the original action that Texas had filed against Pennsylvania and three other of the swing states. And we did that in the first week of December. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided not to hear the case. So I was also involved in asking it to hear cases coming up out of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and also in Georgia.
Is there any process still going until our day today?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is there any process still ongoing now? Are we waiting for some results?
Well, there's still one case pending down in Georgia called Favorito versus Raffensperger. And that case has already uncovered a great deal of not only illegality, but actual they were given access to one of the machines for a while, and they identified duplicate ballots that were counted multiple times.
Yeah. Turning to a critical date in American history, January 6, 2021, can you walk us through your actions and whereabouts on that day?
Well, on January 6th, of course, is the day the Constitution or the statute requires the Congress to meet. The Constitution's pretty clear. The House and the Senate are just to be present. The Vice President is the one that opens the ballots, and then they're counted. And so my advice was that you had state legislators from a number of the key swing states who were elections were illegally conducted and should have been certified. And I recommended that the vice president accede to their request to delay things a little bit so they could try and get to the bottom of what happened and decide whether, in fact, President Biden had actually won once you discount all the illegal votes, or whether President Trump had won.
My other question is, you said at the beginning that President Trump called on you. So I assume you have a relationship on a personal level with President Trump. And when I saw you in DC a few weeks ago, you talked about his presence at Mar-a-Lago when he saw you, he saw your daughter, and he supports your cause. I mean, you have now legal issues with many states. Can you tell us more about this relationship and your connection with him?
Well, it's not, I wouldn't consider myself to be in his inner circle. I don't know him that well, but when he came down the famous escalator in 2015 and announced his candidacy for presidency, one of the platforms in his campaign was birthright citizenship and correcting the misunderstanding of our 14th Amendment mandate of automatic citizenship. Scholars and members of the media kind of derided him for that statement, saying the Constitution is something you can't change like that. And he came back down and said that, but it's not what the Constitution means. And at his next press conference, he waived a law review article describing that subject to the jurisdiction meant more than just being physically present here. And that law review article was mine. So that was the first connection I had with him. I didn't meet him personally at the time. 3 years later, I did a show with Mark Levin, full long hour on his television show, talking about the illegality of the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel to investigate President Trump and the whole Russia collusion scandal, which was a hoax.
Yeah.
And I said there was no legal basis for his appointment in the first place. President Trump was watching that and tweeted it out on his account and invited me up to the White House to meet him some months later, just to meet. It wasn't until the fall of 2020, though, that he actually brought me on board. And I should explain why he contacted me. So the issues that were coming up had a combination of expertise that was required. Supreme Court practice, but also election law, and a very rare and unique expertise in the constitutional authority of state legislatures during the Electoral College, the validity of the Electoral Count Act, all of those things. And very few people in the country had that expertise. And I happen to have all three: the election law, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court. So he called on me in late November. I had testified before the Florida legislature in that last hotly contested election in 2000 down in Florida between George Bush and Al Gore.
Yeah.
I testified as an expert before the legislature there, and then was retained by the Florida legislature to help draft legislation that would protect their electoral vote if the Supreme Court hadn't intervened. So I had that particular piece, and he called on me to try and figure out a strategy that would get the courts to actually look at the illegality that occurred.
And you succeeded very well. So let's talk about the 100 days President Trump is back in office. It's coming soon. So what do you think he will prioritize, and what should the American people expect from his administration?
Well, I'm not on the inner circle to know, but I just watch what I'm seeing, and I've been very impressed. It seems like President Trump did not sit idly by the last 4 years, bemoaning his stolen loss, but was preparing to back and fix some things that he hadn't been able to get to in the first administration. I think first and foremost those is he gained an appreciation of how corrupt and broad and deep the pervasiveness of what they call the deep state or the entrenched bureaucracy is. And I think he came in the second term here, bound and determined to reel in that beast, that unholy beast. And so, whether it's DOGE or reasserting executive authority over executive agencies, which is the only way these agencies are accountable to we, the American people, by the way, if they are answerable to the person who we elect. And they've all gotten the notion that somehow they operate on their own without any oversight or accountability to we, the American people. And so I think number one is President Trump came in bound and determined to fix that.
Yeah.
There were so many times in his first term in office where he would issue a directive and the deep state, the bureaucracy would just ignore it or do the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think he was not going to let that happen this time.
Okay, let's talk about yourself. You faced scrutiny and persecution because you support President Trump. Can you tell us what is in this? What are the cases that you're facing now with the? I don't know where. Can you tell us about what you're facing as a result of this support? And this is drowning you down a little bit.
Yeah, so I've been involved now in defending 18 different actions that were filed arising out of my representation of President Trump in the 2020 election. There are 3 matters still pending, but I was an unindicted co-conspirator in Jack Smith's criminal indictment against President Trump in D.C. I'm indicted along with President Trump in Georgia under a racketeering charge, first and foremost, but also for when I responded to requests from state legislators to come testify about their constitutional authority. One of the charges against me was that amounted to a solicitation of them to violate their oath of office. It was preposterous. I'm indicted in Arizona. President Trump is not indicted there, but he is listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. Yeah. And then I'm still fighting the California bar who are trying to take away my bar license. And thus far, the trial judge there has recommended disbarment, and that recommendation can only take effect if the California Supreme Court approves it. And we're on appeal now addressing that issue. So, and already about $1.6 million in legal fees I've incurred trying to defend against all this stuff.
That's so tough on you. Let us talk about Pam Bondi. What is, in your view, the structural change she has to do as an attorney general? What is the opportunity now to do some reforms in the justice system?
Well, I think first and foremost, and this ties back to the first thing I said about President Trump coming in ready to bring to heel the rogues in the deep state and the bureaucracy, and that includes the Department of Justice.
Mm,
So we've seen kind of two paths. We've seen the career lawyers
mm,
in a number of President Trump's cases or cases that have been brought trying to block President Trump's executive orders, who have done a phenomenally good job as career bureaucrats should do. They should take their marching orders from the boss.
mm,
And they've done a very good job, and they're very competent lawyers. Others who have continued to resist or obstruct the president's agenda from within the ranks of their positions at the Department of Justice, some of them have already been fired, and I expect we'll see a lot more of that.
mm,
Um, you've got to, if you're going to be a career official in the Department of Justice, you have to understand that you have a client. The client is the president, is the United States, as the president of the United States' agenda is implementing. And if you're not willing to do that, you should resign or anticipate being fired. So I think Pam Bondi is trying to separate the lambs from the goats, as it were, and
yeah.
Harmeet Dillon is now the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division. She just got confirmed and took office. Her first day was last Monday, and that I think is the division of the Department of Justice that is most ideologically driven against President Trump, and so she's going to have her hands full. But I think she'll very quickly be up to speed on who's willing to do the job that is called for and who's willing to obstruct and should be fired.
Yeah, I have a question. I've met General Mike Flynn a few weeks ago, and he said if President Trump wouldn't win the election, he would be for life in jail. Can you imagine that? At this point, the situation was so awful and so tough.
Well, and completely distorted. I mean, they were, in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt's Attorney General named Robert Jackson. He would later go on to become a Supreme Court justice and headed the Nuremberg trials after World War II over in Germany. He gave a speech, very, very important and famous speech in 1940 to all the U.S. attorneys, warning them against the temptation, the risk of using their prosecutorial powers to go after people they don't like and then scour the books to find something they could pin them on. That's what's been happening with President Trump, but magnified. They've not only scoured the books to find something to pin it on him, they've distorted the books, the law books, to try and use statutes for purposes never intended in order to go after him. And I do think if he had not won the election, that would have continued until the remainder of his life.
Yeah.
Why are they so upset with him? Because he is shining a light on the corruption that our federal government, our centralized government, has become, and kicking over the apple cart to do something about it. And there are a lot of powerful interests that have grown fat and sassy living on our taxpayer funds. I mean, just the exposure that we've seen with Elon Musk and Doge of, the unbelievably corrupt money and money laundering going on with USAID and Medicare and all these other things that are going on. They're shining a light, and the people that are accustomed to that graft think that they're entitled to it, and they're going to go after everything they've got against anybody trying to shine a light on what's been going on.
Yeah, they are exposing the truth. As a former dean at Chapman University, you've seen the American education system up very close. What kind of reforms do you believe is necessary now and should be implemented?
Well, one, I would cut off federal funding to all of these institutions that are bent on destroying America. It's not in the benefit of the United States to be funding major higher education institutions that are trying to undermine the United States. So I just get rid of it all. Except for things, there's some things, scientific research, military defense research that you pay for contracts to do. I'm fine with that. But the rest of this stuff, this ideological money that's going into run counter to American interests, I think needs to stop. Second thing, and I think the president has already done this, the blatant unconstitutionality of their admissions and hiring processes with DEI, with hiring people based on race or gender identity or national origin, when the 14th Amendment specifically prohibits that for state universities. And public accommodation laws prohibit it for private universities. So the president saying enough is enough. You're either going to actually start following the Constitution and quit discriminating against people on the basis of race, or you're not going to get any money for it. And some of you may end up being criminally prosecuted as well.
How can we explain to our audience, which is from outside the US as well, that canceling or putting an end for for the education department, it's not a big deal, and it's affecting the American people and the American education positively. It's not it's a federal department. So can you explain more on this?
Sure, we got along pretty fine with the first 200 years of our nation's history without a federal Department of Education. It wasn't founded until 1979 under President Jimmy Carter. And they've spent billions and billions of dollars since its founding in 1979 with not only no benefit, but actual harm. Our test scores, our literacy rates are worse now than they were when the Department of Education was founded. Mm-hmm. And look, the theory behind the Department of Education is an old progressive notion that there are experts. If we bring them to Washington, they'll control everything and we'll all be better off because the experts know better than ordinary people how to run things. Well, it turns out that's not very true. That central premise of the progressive movement is false. The experts get it wrong more often than not. And when you have everything consolidated, an error there, it means it's a nationwide error with nationwide impact. Whereas if some school district in central Texas or southern Illinois makes an error, it's confined and people can learn from those mistakes. So the Department of Education has had a big net negative on our education system. And so by eliminating it, you're going to end up with a net positive. Send money back to the states. And by the way, as an interim, they're going to give grants to the states, but I would get rid of that. You need to reconnect the state tax system with the benefits. So instead of our tax money going to Washington for the Department of Education to distribute to South Illinois, let the folks in South Illinois decide how much to tax themselves for the education of the kids in South Illinois. Connect taxes with benefit, and you end up improving the lot all across the country. And so I think ultimately that would be the goal.
Yeah. John Eastman, finally, you had a documentary. Can you tell us where we can watch it? What is it about? And we saw part of it when we met you here. There was a function and we were we were part of it. So tell us where we can watch more about your life, your struggles, your advice, and also your notions, good notions.
Sure. So Hollywood did a documentary about the lawfare I've been subjected to for the last 4 years. It's called The Eastman Dilemma, Lawfare or Justice. And it lays out the case of the illegality that occurred in the 2020 election and what my advice was on how to deal with that. And then the lawfare that has resulted since. And people can watch it. By the way, it premiered at Mar-a-Lago on January 4th. And President Trump came and watched it with us, and Marco Rubio and Scott and Mike Waltz, and also he had with him Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Oh. So they all watched the movie with us. It was great fun. And but it's still available for free streaming. It's eventually going to go up on one of the paid platforms, and we'll have to take it down from the free site. But at eastmandilemma.com, they can watch it and free stream it right now. And it lasts about an hour. Get some friends and family together with you and watch it. I think everybody in the country ought to see this movie to learn the actual facts of the 2020 election, but also see the dangerous weaponization of our criminal justice system that has occurred as a result of the lawfare. People need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and you're a live witness of so many facts in this regard. Thank you so much for your honesty. You explained very brilliantly lots of dispelled and you dispelled the wrong notion. So thank you so much for your facts and what you talked about today. Hope to see you soon and happy Easter.
Well, sir, and let me just close with this. If people want to keep up with me, we use my legal defense fund site as a bit of a blog with updates about what's going on. GiveSendGo.com/Eastman. And people can also send donations to help us with our legal defense, but also send prayers. Very
Yeah.
heartwarming. My wife and I read them. And so I'd encourage people to visit that site as well.
We will put it on the screen and we will post it on our social media accounts. Thank you. Thank you again.
Very good. Thank you, Maria. Take care.